Hello, everybody, and welcome to this panel discussion, and greetings to the panelists, and of course, everybody watching wherever you are. So this is the panel discussion that's focused on Saudi Arabia and investing in the future. And as we understand it, it's the only panel discussion that will focus specifically on Saudi Arabia during this two-day event. So we have a lot to cover over the next 45 minutes. And before we go straight into it, if people do have questions that come up that they'd like to ask to our esteemed panelists at the end of the discussion, feel free to send them in through the hub, and I'll take a note of them and try to make some time for them at the end. But we'll go straight into it, and I'd like to start with Hassan, please, representing the ministry. There was a short intro video playing before this panel about how the pandemic has acted as a natural catalyst for digitalisation in Saudi Arabia, as it has all over the world. But how has this digital acceleration been reflected in the financial services sector? And how does this align broadly with the goals of Vision 2030?
Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for this question, and welcome everyone. So today I'm going to speak about that. So before I will go to how we are treating that and how that affects the digitization of the financial services. I would like to mention and emphasize in our efforts in KSA overall since the day one of the pandemic. We have taken a very serious measures in which we have been able to isolate regions and cities, and that showed our strength of governance, execution, as well as strength in the way we envisioned how serious this was at the beginning. Needless to mention that this also, we have also taken another serious measure by injecting a lot of billions of dollars to sustain the economy of Saudi Arabia, so on and so forth. Digitization aspect is a huge matter of that. So regarding the financial and specific, to be honest, I mean, it started a long time ago, not just beginning, not just now. A couple of years ago, we have enforced a couple of sectors in KSA to provide POS solutions, and that created multi-billion dollars of non-cash transaction. We will continue doing so, and we will start to enforce that in other sectors as well. Now, if you come, you see a lot of non-cash transactions available to us. Today in KSA, we stand at 28 to 30% of the transactions are non-cash. This is not enough for sure. We want to increase that by the year 2030 into almost 80%. And that will gonna inflow around 270 billion US dollars of non-cash transaction at that year. So we have the infrastructure ready to do so. Not only that, even if we speak about the fintech, we started the fintech long time ago before the pandemic itself. Our numbers are shining, to be honest. We have now a sandbox that is regulated under the Capital Market Authority, as well as the SAMA, which is our Central Bank of Saudi Arabia. I'll speak just in SAMA, and you can imagine. So at SAMA, we have been receiving a formal request of 32 sandbox from requests from global fintechs and local fintechs as well, 12 of which have passed, and that gives us a very strong rate of passing and graduation from the sandbox into production. So 12 we have, and also there are another 5 that have got fully licensed directly without going to the sandbox itself. So we are flexible. We have trust in the section, in the sector itself. We have a confidence in our regulation. Those combined is 17. As we speak today, just from SAM's standpoint, definitely CMA also have different number as well. We envision by 2030 to reach a number of 60 fintechs. So we are almost 30% of the way, and still there are 9 years coming over. So we are doing well under the way toward that vision and toward that number. This is just to show you a bit of how digitization plays a role, not just on financial, but also in a bigger umbrella of our economy.
Thank you very much for that intro. And I think it's a nice time to bring in Abdullah from the Capital Markets Authority, because the CAMA also has a key role to play in the financial sector development program that supports Vision 2030. So Abdullah, how would you assess the progress in recent years towards your goals of facilitating funding and encouraging investment through the capital markets?
Well, first of all, thank you, Patrick, for having me today with you and with the distinguished guests and audience. This is actually a very important question because this is what the capital market is supposed to do. Mainly is to encourage investing and facilitate funding. And that's why we have it. We have both of them as pillars, main pillars of our strategy, which is inspired by the country's vision for 2030, which includes 4 pillars: encouraging investment, facilitating funding, as well as promoting confidence and building capacities. And the way our strategy is built is to facilitate businesses as well as to promote discipline, because it's very important for regulators to put hands in both levers, discipline and governance, as well as facilitation. Speaking of the 2 pillars you have mentioned, specifically facilitating funding and encouraging investment, we have been looking at them in different dimensions in order to achieve the best efficiency of the market to support the economy. More specifically, we looked at the variety of asset classes that are available in the market, as well as the different cycles of businesses that companies go through: small businesses, mature businesses, growing businesses, and so on and so forth. And let me elaborate a little bit further on this. A few years ago, before the launch of the strategy and the aspiring vision, it's only the access to capital market was available only for large companies through the IPO to main market. So much happened ever since. We have overhauled and developed the offering mechanism in the main market for better price discovery and transparency through book building instructions, through the offering of securities regulations. And we also created the parallel market or NMO market to serve a segment of companies that were not able to access the main market in the past. We also developed different offering regimes. I mentioned, for example, exempt offers that help small businesses to raise a smaller amount of capital to grow or to establish businesses, and to help entrepreneurs as well. We overall, the private equity and venture capital funds regulations and environment to foster that class even further. One thing Hassan mentioned, which is enabling fintech tools for raising capital, and now we do have several crowdfunding platforms that helped significantly small businesses, and even fed into the companies that are growing to go to NMO market and later for the main market. One thing to add, which is the development of other alternative investment asset classes. REITs were not available in the past. Now they are available. We have 17 REITs listed in the market, which have been growing, even benefiting from the access to capital being listed. Instrument close-ended funds or ETPs are now available. We have one listed last year. Not to forget the fixed income and sukuk market, which is a very important asset class that we have been working closely on. We have now seen the market coming a very long time, and actually today the Saudi sukuk market is included in the watch list of FTSE, which is an acknowledgement to the development that the fixed income market came on the way. On encouraging investment, I don't want to forget that part. We have been looking at it on 3 dimensions: the variety of products. Today, the market, compared to only cash equity market in the past, now it has derivatives, other asset classes, including fixed income, REITs, securities borrowing and lending, short selling. Also the market infrastructure, I don't want the other dimension, which I don't want to forget, which is a very critical dimension to encourage investment. Two main development happened, which are the settlement cycle, the establishment of the CCP, that are a very important catalysts for institutional investors, not only local, but also international. And not to forget transparency and governance. We have mandated the bilingual disclosure. The rules of government changed 2 years ago, which increased the ranking of the Saudi in international indices, minority interest protection, shareholders governance. We are the second or third in global ranking. Market data, investors relations, they are all very important components to encourage investment. All in all, these changes that came from the strategy, the benefits have been reflected in many ways. We have been the market that hosted the largest IPO ever. The pipeline of IPOs, as His Excellency mentioned yesterday in the opening remark, unprecedented. Assets under management growth, it is now the highest ever, 17% of the GDP, around 440 billion Saudi riyal. Foreign investment, it's around 13% today of the market free float, and around 200 billion Saudi riyal in total, and all endorsed by all global indices, MSCI, FTSE, S&P, which are a bet for the development that came all the way.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues there that we'll come and touch on a little bit more later. But at this point, I want to bring in Mohammed and on this issue of foreign investment, actually, because the Tadwell opened up to foreign investors in 2015. And I believe now there's around 2,900 foreign investors registered to trade on the market. So Mohammed, I mean, how would you assess the success so far of looking to stimulate foreign investment activity through the market? And perhaps could you tell us how the pandemic's impacted foreign investor interest?
Certainly, Patrick, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak among your esteemed guests. So we are in Tadawul always looking for ways to cater for all investors in our markets, but to your question about foreign investors, I remember closely when we first started the journey of attracting institutional investors globally. We used to sit with them and end the meeting with a long list of points that need to be changed or enhanced. Small things like having a dedicated web page for investors and the issuer's website, to something major like changing the settlement from T+0 to T+X. And every time we get the list shorter and shorter, and with great collaboration from the regulator like CMA and the central bank, and the great collaboration also from the members, whether they are brokers, custodians, we managed to do those changes and ended up being included in the emerging market indices. And we didn't stop there. I mean, certainly the list is shorter and we managed to get the passive investors. And now we're looking on different things and unlocking different buckets of investors. The specialized one, like the specific industry investors, the high frequency, the investors who are looking to find hidden gems in emerging markets. And that ended up increasing the interest of foreign investors into our market significantly. So during the pandemic, we in Tadawul, in the Saudi market, witnessed a sell-off like every other market in the world. And the WHO became the main source of information that reflected on the market's performance. And as we go receive updates, you can see the reflection in the markets globally. But we managed to do it well because we just came out from the journey of inclusion, the EM inclusion, and we didn't get any impact during the lockdown, except for shortening the trading hour. But the market worked very well. The investor didn't face any issue. We changed the practices, for example, like the e-voting. We had it in place from beginning, even before the pandemic. So the investor did not touch the connection with the issuers. Now we're looking into different indices like the REITs, like the closed-ended funds, ETFs, and as Mr. Abdullah has said, this morning we've received the announcement from FTSE that we've been on the watch list for the market, which has a great potential. And this is as a result of the many changes we did in the debt market. But we always care about numbers. So we ended up 2020 by having an increase in 2020, 22% number of QFIs. And we ended up the year with the QFIs being net buyers by around 20 billion Saudi riyal. And we are witnessing a great activity from investors from the beginning of this year. Now they own about more than 13% of the free float shares in a market that's about $2.5 trillion US. So we I think believe that we've managed the pandemic very well. There is great interest from investors, growing interest from investors. We need to do some enhancements, but every enhancement they ask for, it's either something that we already planned for or something that we need to tweak existing services and product for it. It's a never-ending journey for us. And we will continue the same exercise by hearing from the foreign investor, which will result eventually in more interest in the market. There are different factors that impact their decision, but we want to make sure that the ecosystem and the capital market in general, in collaboration with the other stakeholders, are well suited for them to invest.
Thank you, Mohammed. That was excellent. So I'd like to bring in Sharbil now for a more regional perspective. And we've heard from Mohammed and from Abdullah about new products, new asset classes that have been introduced to the market. Sharbil, last year we saw the launch of the derivatives market on the Tadawul, and I believe that's the third in the region after Dubai and to a much smaller extent Kuwait. To what extent is this proving to be effective in attracting more institutional investors to the market? Perhaps what further derivative products could be introduced to enhance the appeal?
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for having me today with my esteemed colleagues and guests with you today. Patrick, I think each of what Abdullah, Mohammed, and Hassan had mentioned adds up together to give you the peripheral of a successful financial infrastructure within Saudi. And I think given the work that the Saudi government with its entities like the CMA, Tadawul, SAMA, and the Ministry of Finance, along with PIF, have put in to increase the exposure in these markets, is today the time from a chronicle timeline to look at derivatives, right? And derivatives is a very important trading tool to attract institutional investors from all over. Given the growth and spur of QFIs within Saudi, given the complex structure of product definition within the Saudi capital markets, if I recall 10 years ago, you had the equity mutual funds. To a certain extent, you had the fixed income mutual funds and the cash-related funds. In that 10-year span, the growth within Saudi and the rest of the region, but Saudi has been leading the way in that matter, per se, in puzzling the exact eco-financial system that supports a long-term growth with it for our markets and sustainability for our markets. I think from a derivatives perspective, it is very important for international institutional investors to have such tools for hedging, to spur more liquidity into our markets, to promote even more transparency within conducting that derivatives business in our markets. I think with that, we've seen a lot of discussions happening around these products. From a benchmark perspective, as an index provider and as a leading index provider in the region, we have positioned ourselves in terms of licensing our indices to institutional investors or asset managers that are looking at trading derivatives, being in UAE, Kuwait, or even Saudi for that fact. We consult our clients from an international perspective and from a regional perspective on what are the gaps that they are looking for to invest in terms of index derivatives. We initially looked at a few liquid, more version indices that focus on Saudi, and one which is a bit more wider on the GCC, and the MENA one, because we believe Saudi being the higher proportion of these markets within the GCC and the MENA region, we still believe there are interests and there are opportunities within the Saudi market itself to promote and to deliver on the index derivatives. I think the other things that we are currently looking at, obviously, to promote on the derivative side are more of a robust structured products, or maybe to a further extent looking at Sharia index futures in the future. I think overall, we are really impressed. I mean, we've been working with the Saudis from a regulatory perspective with Tadawul and the investment community, and the growth and the demand has been hand in hand, which is amazing to see in such a market, given the times we are in currently.
Excellent. Abdullah, just another question on this foreign investment participation. Last year, the Capital Markets Authority also moved to allow both resident and non-resident foreigners to invest in listed and non-listed debt instruments. Maybe you can just expand briefly on how this enhances the attractiveness and the competitiveness of the markets in Saudi Arabia.
The way it helps, it's actually the way we see it, to be more specific, is diversifying investors base is always good for markets. It's always good for efficiency. If I look at, if I elaborate further on this, it is deepening. It is great to deepen the market and the financial market products for both investors and be it retail investors or institutional investors. So deepening the market by having wider access for wider base of investors is good for the market. The second thing, which is always important, critical, which is achieving the efficiency. As long as we have diverse investors base with different views on the market, with different backgrounds, it's always good for efficiency, always good for pricing, always good for practices, be it research, be it investor relations, or a few things like ESG and etc. The third very important point, which is on the issuers level, it's when we witness a more diverse investor base, it is contributing positively great deal to businesses where they do have access to different sources of funding with better pricing and cost of capital. So this is one part we have started last year, and we are starting to see signs of development, as mentioned earlier, that the market is now on the watch list. So we are hoping to see further development and benefits to the market from that.
Excellent. And Hassan, I'd like to bring you back in. I mean, at the start, you gave us a very good rundown on a lot of the progress that had been made in financial services and enhancing the investment environment. On the other side, what does the ministry identify as some of the biggest remaining barriers to foreign investment in Saudi Arabia, particularly in relation to the financial markets, and what has been planned to address these barriers?
Well, thanks, Patrick, for the question. I think my colleagues in this panel discussion have showed a very excellent results out of the regulation aspect. We would never be able to receive such a result without a very strong regulation bodies and background. Us at the Ministry of Investment, we focus so much on 4 pillars. We focus on reducing the risk of doing business, increasing the ease of doing business, help finding funding alternatives, and finally help the investors capitalize on the competitive advantage of the kingdom. And we need to focus on something. We look into the financial sector as a supportive sector to the main economy. We saw a huge increment in our economy, specifically in non-oil and gas related, and therefore we saw a very healthy also growth from the financial sector to support the growth again in the main economy. And again, that is shows the strength of the regulation as well as the health of the business side as well that we have to mention here. We work directly with the regulators. KSA has two major regulators. We have the Capital Market Authority, which take care of securities and investment related. And on the other hand, we have SAMA, which is our central bank, that takes care of the currencies and licensing and commercial banking activities, treasury, what have you. And I'll give you a couple of things before I go to your question, the barriers or how we can see the barriers that may affect the financial sector in specific. If you talk about SAMA, for example, for the last 2 to 3 years, they worked very well. We worked with them and we helped reducing the regulation requirement for foreign banks and financial institutions to be landed successfully in the kingdom. That helped a lot. If you looked in the last track record of our central bank, you can see very large names that recently landed in KSA and many more coming the way. Let me state its name here. We have the Bank of China, licensed 2019. We do have Credit Suisse licensed last year. We do have also Standard Chartered. All of that, we have Trade Bank of Iraq. I mean, these 4 banks are very major, specifically the first 3, and they just recently landed in the kingdom. This is if you see. We will never be able to attract 3 international banks if we don't have a very strong and very revised, I would say, regulation body. It's very clear, everything is there. If you talk about CMA, they did tremendous efforts in clarifying the requirements, reducing the capital requirements, enabling not just the traditional funding alternatives and solutions, but even new ways and measures to help reducing the gap. I would like to speak about numbers that matter the most to us. Today we have NEOM, for example, that is worth of $500 billion US. We have the Red Sea that worth of around 12 to 13 billion US dollars. We have. I mean, if we don't have a very strong financial bodies with a very diversified financial portfolio in terms of instruments and products, we will never be able to close this gap. And yet to say we will never be able also to attract the financial institutions to KSA, because the global is being developed and the financial sector being developed, and we have each and every quarter and year we see new instruments and new products, and we thank the Ministry of Investment, SAMA and CMA efforts to help coping with the global community in terms of products portfolio. Back to CMA. CMA again did a great job reducing their requirements and clarifying the regulation. And the results, take a look. I think the latest bank that was licensed by CMA is Crédit Agricole. It's the largest, one of the largest banks in France and Europe. We have Natixis also got licensed from France. We have BNY Mellon as well, which is the largest custodian in the world. We attracted it successfully to the kingdom. We have State Street that custody around $6 trillion US also. We attracted them to be allocated in the kingdom. This is on the international level, even local level as well. There are a couple of new financial institutions that come to place. So we're not just talking about the commercial activities. We're talking completing the picture from investment activities as well. If you talk about Tadawul, greatly they have enhanced the product portfolios. Before we used to have just the stocks. Now we have the stocks, whether in the basic markets or in the more market for the SMEs. We have tradable securities as well that came recently, and again that helps the non-financial specific sectors to close the funding gap. We are very famous in KSA to depend on the commercial banking to provide the debt. We stand at almost 90% of the funding now coming from traditional way of debt. But this is yet to be changed, and we need to change that. And CMA and Tadawul has taken a very serious efforts on the fintech solutions, crowdfunding, like what my colleague has mentioned. as well as tradable securities, bonds, funds, what have you. All of that have helped creating new funding alternatives to our economy. But having that said, we definitely see that we need to be more well balanced in terms of how restricted we are. But we need to focus on something. The financial sector is well mixed with other sectors as well. So it is a bigger umbrella than the financial bodies. We don't want just to sit and say CMA and SAMA need to be more friendly and need to reduce the regulations. But also we need to focus on the other hand, like the taxation, for example, regime in case that affects any sector, specifically the financial sector, and more specific in the equity-related investments. We have a couple of tax regimes. We have like corporate income tax, we have dividend transferring tax, withholding tax, we have capital gain, and what have you. And this also need to be rethinked and re-looked into it in order for us to ease the regulation and reduce the risk and enhance the capabilities of attracting financial and institution, whether a physical presence, establishing a regional headquarter, what have you, or even capital allocation from the board down to the KSA. We also, the laws and bylaws, for example, that we run in the KSA, we need to be a bit flexible of having more understandable language of the law that is well understood by the financial community around the world. And we are working in the Ministry of Investments with banking financial specifics with CMA and SAMA again to further ease the regulation, further clarify the regulation. And we are putting a very high targets to be attracted to the kingdom, as well as we are working also with non-specifics regulation that affect the financial sector, like Gazette and Ministry of Justice, and etc. And I think this is at the nutshell how I can see and how I summarize the regulation and barriers that we have in KSA today.
Thank you, Hassan, for that very interesting, comprehensive answer. I'll move on to another topic now, just with the 15 minutes we have left. And what's a very hot topic, I think, already at this event this year, which is ESG. Mohammed, I'd like to bring you in here. To what extent is ESG important for the future development of Tadawul, and what are your plans in this area?
Yeah, Patrick, indeed, it is a hot topic. ESG investments globally has been getting traction and growing in double digits in the past few years. As an investment concept, and I'll explain that in a minute, is relatively new in the region. So companies need education, awareness, and ESG-related matters. It's important for Tadawul. We've joined the Sustainable Stock Exchange back in 2018. We are working with different organizations such as King Khalid Foundation, Future Investment Institute to join forces and help promote ESG in the kingdom. And we are discussing this with key international players. With such a large volume of assets now guided by sustainable investment practices, we have a responsibility to all market participants and stakeholders to highlight this importance and provide them with opportunities that ESG presents. So now investors are not only looking for the traditional yields, they're looking for positive impact on the environment, on the society, and to protect the interest of the stakeholder. So when you break down the ESG, the governance, the G, I think my colleague Abdullah talked about how we ranked very high in corporate governance in certain items. And when it comes to the sustainable and social, I think the companies and our companies are doing a great practice and they're doing well to their society for different reasons before even the concept of ESG. And when it comes to the environment, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman unveiled on Saturday that the Saudi Green Initiative and the Green Middle East Initiative, and he said that the two initiatives will shape the kingdom tendency to protect earth and nature. So we believe with his guidance and since this is a goal for our country and the region, this will definitely impact our companies positively. So our role is to help our listed company, and we will soon issue our first ever ESG disclosure guide to support the listed company, encourage them and guide them on how to be compliant with the best practices of ESG, because they have the practice, they need to put it in the right way, in the right disclosure format, in their annual report, in order to get more benefits out of their good practices they do. And probably if we see a great response, which we believe will be the case, we might introduce an index, an ESG specific index.
Interesting. I think it's a good time to bring in Sharbel on this issue, just to get more of a regional perspective. Sharbel, how did the ESG developments in Saudi Arabia correspond with wider trends in the region towards ESG adoption and compliance? And maybe you can tell us what you think is the regional and global appetite for ESG investments in the region and Saudi Arabia specifically.
Sure. Thanks, Patrick. So I think we at S&P Dow Jones Indices, we take ESG very seriously. And what I mean by that is we are very serious about engaging with our clients, with our stakeholders, to increase the awareness and the growth of ESG impacting and investing globally. Through that, we had 4 to 5 years ago bought a company called TrueCost that specializes in carbon and fossil fuel and carbon efficient data. And last year, or a year and a half ago, we concluded our acquisition of a company called SAM, which is one of the largest ESG analytics companies in the world. With that, and that's more on the global space and the global coverage, we have extensive global ESG capabilities that we do globally in Europe and in the US and the rest of the world, including our PACT and the Paris aligned indices that we had launched at the beginning of this year. But if I come to our region here, which I've been looking after for almost 12 years now, what is essential is when we started looking at ESG back in 2011, and we go back that long, when we launched our first ESG index for the MENA region in collaboration with Hawkama, a Dubai-based company. Initially, it was difficult to gather the data. And initially, like Mr. Abdullah had mentioned, the disclosure 10 years ago was not what it is today. It has improved marginally, and it has improved initially marginally and has improved much more in the past 5 to 7 years. I think within our Pan-Arab ESG index, we cover 150 companies, of which 50 make it to the index. And if I have to look at this index today, the scores 8 years ago were the average scores were much lower, and we calculate our index based on an E score, an S score, and a G score, which combines them together to give you a one quantitative score, which is based on 230 questions that we do ask these companies that make it to our index. So I think today the average of these scores are much higher than what it is. The coverage is around 150 stocks in the MENA region, which is around 80% of the market capitalization of our standard S&P Pan-Arab Large Mid Index, which is in line in correlation. And coming to that, Patrick, I think we have seen the countries, the regional countries, given Saudi, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait to a certain extent, the interest of developing and taking that extra step into the whole ESG infrastructure development. Last year, we launched with DFM and ASCA, the regulator in the UAE, a UAE ESG index, which covers both Abu Dhabi and Dubai markets as well as NASDAQ. It's an UAE ESG 20 index, covers the largest 20 companies with the highest ESG scores. This is also was in collaboration with Hawkama. We are currently as well looking to launch a GCC-wide ESG index, and at some point as well a Saudi ESG index to that extent. So we have seen interest from asset managers. We have seen interest from asset owner and sovereign wealth funds in our region. And I think the more discussions in the past were more around liquidity and performance. Now we are seeing more the discussion shifting more and more into the ESG component and the impact of these companies that would make in that space.
Thank you very much, Sharbel. So we just have 5-6 minutes left. I'd like to touch on some kind of hot issues to finish, Hassan, just briefly to ask, I think it would be remiss not to ask you from the Ministry of Investment, even though it's not directly related perhaps to the financial markets. One of the most eye-catching recent announcements was the Project HQ announcement of trying to nudge companies looking to get Saudi government contracts to establish their regional headquarters in Saudi Arabia. How do you feel this plan has been received by major international corporations operating in the region?
Thanks, Patrick. I will shortcut my answer due to time frame, but we are happy at the Ministry of Investments. We need to mention the role also of RCRC. So we both take the lead on this to attract RHQ to the kingdom. We have announced through His Excellency Minister Khalid Al-Falih in the FII about around the 20 companies, global companies, that we've successfully signed an agreement with them to relocate their RHQ to the kingdom. And as you all heard about the rule about coming years, we need somehow to, the people see it as enforcement RHQ to the kingdom in order for them to work with the government. So we see this as a Ministry of Investments, as a lead to attract investment to KSA. We see this as enablement, not as enforcement. 60 to 70% of bulk of revenues that come in the region, they come from Saudi clients. So it makes absolute sense for them to be relocated to Riyadh or what have you in the KSA, to be closer to their client. We have national champions. To be honest, we have global champions. We have the Saudi, we have the Aramcos, we have the SABICs, we have the PIFs, we have. It's a multi-billion dollars company each. And this is number one. Number two, when we attract them, we also focus on enablement as well. We are extending our absolute hand to support the international community to come to Saudi Arabia. We try to reduce the regulation barriers. We try to give them favorable treatments of the government contracts. Today, we have a local content authorities well established. We don't speak strategy anymore. There is a mandatory list published there that you can see that we need to localize those list of products to be bought by the government and semi-government organizations. So we talk about multi-billion dollar businesses. Needless to mention about the special economic zones that will help their RHQs located there. We have announced that we have a couple of ones. Couple of weeks from now, inshallah, there is 1 to 2 that we officially announced by all the regulations, and it will be followed by different other special economic zones, not just in Riyadh, across the kingdom, not just in financial sector, across the sectors. There's a short answer of your question, but again, enablement, not enforcement.
Thank you, Hassan. No, very interesting. I'd like to ask this question both to Mohammed and Abdullah, actually. You know, if we take into account these efforts to diversify the economy, generate new growth engines, also, you know, incentivize foreign businesses, develop mega projects that was touched on before, what does this all mean for the prospects for future IPOs in the kingdom? And, you know, what more can be done to incentivize these, you know, new entrants and fast-growing businesses that the best race to raise capital is actually through the capital markets in Saudi Arabia? Mohammed and Abdullah, I don't know who would like to answer first, but I think both of you can add interesting points.
If Abdullah allows me. All the major efforts that are taking place to diversify the economy and develop new sectors, just what my colleague said, Hassan, and all the development that's happening here in the kingdom have a positive impact in IPOs in the kingdom. The development will drive growth in many areas for different companies, whether they are large or the medium or the small. And we have all the platforms to cater for the needs. And we encourage successful business to grow even bigger and utilize the full potential of the Saudi capital market by going public. I mean, if you look at the recent IPOs, the coverage ratio, the average coverage ratio, probably 5x, and we've seen 10x. There's a great demand from investor for a new story, for companies and investment opportunity that they can share and be part of their success story, and we will enable them as a Saudi market. And we've seen even increased interest from foreign investors For every IPO, we see a higher percentage of our investors looking to invest, and we provide them, I think, the direct way for established companies. The development being implemented by CMA and Tadawul, and to follow the global best practice, to go along with the changes that happens under the Vision 2030, they all add to attractiveness of Tadawul and support the success story of any business. And I'll refer to the opening statement by the CMA chairman yesterday. They are reviewing more than 30 applicants. I think this is a record for the market. I'm very optimistic about the number of IPOs for this year. We believe we'll have many companies and instruments in different sectors, and will be an enabler to this success story of transforming this country and the region as well.
Thank you, Mohammed. Abdullah, would you like to add anything briefly before we go on this issue of IPO and diversification?
Yeah, well, agree with what Mohammed mentioned. Few things to add. The way we see the importance of IPOs overall on the overall economy is their great impact on both businesses and investors. For businesses, IPOs and access to capital is of a great positive impact on entrepreneurs and pioneers for efficiency of capital allocation or capital raising. Not to mention the importance for diversification for investors. If more businesses, more sectors are coming to the market, means more stability and more diversity. Also, not to forget the importance of listing companies for the continuation of companies. So many companies don't survive the third generation or to the third generation, as you know. Capital markets helps companies to continue, especially for an economy that is full of family businesses. So we came very long way over the last few years. We have been seeing new sectors coming to the market: entertainment, HR, financial sector, the Aramco, of course, technology and IT, which haven't been in the market in the past. Again, in the pipeline, we're seeing companies and even new sectors coming from the beginning of the way through private equity to come to Numudan, to the main market. One very important thing, which is the contribution of international investors in IPO, is of a positive trend we are seeing, which wasn't available in the past, which gave the opportunity for both companies to have wider access to wider investors base for price discovery, and on the other hand, for international investors to participate in the growth story of the capital market.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all we have time for at the moment. So I'll have to leave it there. There's lots more things I'd like to discuss. But in the interest of timeliness, I think we'll have to leave it there. So thank you to all the panelists and for everybody watching for this very enlightening discussion. And best of luck with the rest of the event. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Bye.